So, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see if you're still out there. Good afternoon. Hello. Woo! All right. There are voices out there. Good job. So this plenary is dedicated to the growing movement of the rights of nature, which I believe is one of the most promising long-term systemic solutions that we have that can really address a lot of the dire challenges that we've been discussing here at the conference, everything from GMOs to deforestation to keeping fossil fuels in the ground to, of course, these corporate powers that we're all really feeling very oppressed by and fighting back against. My name is Osprey Orielle, and I am the founder and executive director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And our acronym is WECAN, because we think that we can, with all of us together, we can make these changes. And I'm also on the steering committee of the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, which is a coalition of many organizations who are really the backbone of this movement for the rights of nature internationally. At the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, we're really focused actually on navigating urgent issues concerning the front lines of the climate crisis. We particularly work with Indigenous women and women on the front lines all over the world on issues concerning deforestation, agroecology, water issues, and advocacy at many levels. But within that context, even though we do a lot of mobilization and respond to these urgent matters, we know that there is, like many of you, a deep need for a structural analysis that is essential to our transformative strategies. And for this, I think rights of nature has a central role. We can see the signs everywhere about how we should not be living on the earth and with each other. Again, this is the hottest year on record, and things are not looking like they're going to change quickly. We are past 400 parts per million of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. We have huge biodiversity loss. Climate catastrophe is increasing. We're seeing species extinction, and not an immediate stop to this endless economic growth model and overconsumption, all compiling together into these very complex issues that we face and have to navigate. And I think a question that I'm always asking myself is, why haven't we stopped these destructive, lethal actions that are in fact not only lethal, but in many cases legal? So these challenges are multifaceted, they're complex, as you know, ranging from our sense of disconnect from nature as modern day people, as most of us are now living in urban environments, to corrupt governance structures, from environmental racism to capitalism to colonization. These are forces that we are all dealing with. And in this plenary, we want to really address root causes and systemic change in order to address how can we truly live in harmony with our mother planet and each other. And specifically, how legal frameworks regarding nature are a huge part of the problem, but they also could alternatively be central to a large systemic solution. We have environmental laws, as you know, but clearly they're not working, or we would not be in all of these crises. If they were, we wouldn't be careening off a cliff. So in this context, I think rights of nature can be a true game changer. Our Indigenous sisters and brothers have been letting us know for a really long time that modern day people have lost what they call our original instructions about how to live in a good way with each other and our mother planet. From reciprocity practices to our deeper understanding of a worldview and cosmovision about how we are part and particle of nature, not separate from nature, versus a dominion over nature view, which I think has been catastrophic in the human experiment, that for so long we've lived in these structures of seeing ourselves as having dominion over nature. At a recent event that we held in New York City, Ora Cristancho, a young woman leader and representative of the Uwa people of Colombia, reflected upon the stories and prayers told to her by her grandparents. In the beginning, she told us, the Creator established and created the earth in equilibrium. And in the heart of the Uwa people left an original message, instructions to care and protect for Mother Earth. Protecting the earth thus became the mission and center of the Uwa mind, body, and spirit. When oil companies enter their territories, the UA knew immediately that they had to speak out in defense of the land, and they had no misunderstanding about the perils of extraction. The UA called oil Rua and explained that this is the source of all plant and animal life as well as the human spirit. Ora explained to us, for the UA, the oil is the blood of Mother Earth. It is vital to life. If you take out the blood, the whole planet will die, including human beings, she said. In this sense, we must gather our strength and unite in defense of the earth, in defense of life, all of us together, black, white, indigenous, old, young, all of us, she said. So as we talk about rights of nature, I think it's key to recognize that it is also time to lift up Indigenous leadership and responding to Indigenous worldviews and respecting Indigenous rights. I think this is a key component of many strategies that we need to really implement, and it's certainly key to our work at WECAN. It should be noted that 80% of all biodiversity that is left on Earth right now is in the hands of Indigenous people. So Indigenous rights is a key component in this work for rights of nature as well. One of the most effective ways to address our dysfunctional environmental, legal, and economic frameworks and to begin to actually retrace our way back to our original instructions in a way that modern day people can have a cultural understanding, a worldview, but also a legal paradigm that allows us to live in harmony with nature is this rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth framework. So after decades of environmental protection laws, which certainly have gained us really important victories, still our modern legal systems have failed to prevent the increasing grave threats of climate change, degradation of Earth's ecosystems, and the growing displacement of humans and other species. So to truly live sustainably and live in harmony with the Earth, we need to actually change the very DNA of our economy and our legal frameworks so that they can truly adhere to the natural laws of the Earth. Who is for this? I think there's a wolf out there. Also, we need to hear the voice of nature herself. The majority of the world's legal frameworks are based on treating nature as property, and this is inherently a problem we must face. Our life-giving rivers, forests, mountains are treated as property to be sold and consumed, often protected under commerce laws. As property, these natural communities and ecosystems are not recognized as right holders. In our legal systems, because nature is property, it is invisible in the courts. So by adhering to the current structure of law and economy, we are furthering a dangerous human relationship to the natural world of ownership and exploitation. So we need an entirely different legal configuration that recognizes the Earth's living systems are not the enslaved property of humans. It is wrong for men to consider women property. It is wrong for one race to enslave another and claim them as property. So it is wrong for humans to have dominion over the Earth and see nature as property. Our current structure of law calls for environmental regulations as an example, and these regulatory laws do just that. They actually regulate how much pollution we get to inflict upon nature and destroy nature under law. It's legal. So these laws do not actually stop pollution and environmental destruction, but regulate how much harm we can do. So obviously the system is not working. They slow the rate of environmental degradation, but don't stop it. Environmental laws in the US were passed under the authority of the Commerce Clause, which grants exclusive authority over interstate commerce to Congress. Treating nature as commerce has meant that all existing environmental laws in the US operate under the concept of nature as property. So one of the systemic changes we can make, not just here in the United States, but also worldwide, is to move from a property-based legal framework to a rights of nature framework, whereby nature is recognized as a rights-bearing entity. It's clear that we cannot solve this crisis by furthering subjecting the Earth to the very same system and worldview that caused a lot of these crises we're facing. So in other words, capitalism and extractive modern economies inherently and by their very nature rely upon this legalized ownership of the Earth. If a rights of nature legal framework were implemented, activities that harm the ability of ecosystems and nature and natural communities to thrive and naturally restore themselves would be in legal violation of nature's rights. Organizations like the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, Movement Rights, which you're going to be hearing from Shannon Biggs, our organization, WECAN, and others are really working to change the law because, again, we're really seeing we need a deeper systemic analysis and change. This work involves changing local laws to recognize that natural communities and ecosystems possess a fundamental right to exist and flourish, and that residents of those communities possess the legal authority to enforce those rights on behalf of those ecosystems so that we have a say over the places we live that can trump corporate and state law, as an example. And Shannon is an expert on this and we'll be talking about this. It's important to know that this is not theoretical. This framework is gaining traction. In 2006, the community of Tamaqua Borough in Pennsylvania passed an ordinance recognizing nature as a rights-bearing entity. Since then, over 125 communities in the United States have passed local ordinances which recognize rights of nature to protect their ecosystems. Local ordinances today are protecting communities from harmful practices such as shale gas drilling and fracking. So this is actually working and communities are using this framework to win cases in their community. We can think about this also in a deeper sense about our right to change our laws when they're not working. So think about civil rights, suffrage, and the end of apartheid. This is the kind of revolution in our environmental laws that we see as necessary at this time. We need to see that taking back the right to environmental decisions in our communities is actually a movement as large as the civil rights movement. At the national level in 2008, Ecuador became the first country in the world to put rights of nature in its constitution. And there's been a lot of challenges, as some of you might know, with this implementation. But the fact is, it's really important that this happened for the entire movement to have credence, and it's really given us a lot of authority that, in fact, Ecuador put rights of nature to their constitution. We also see this in Bolivia. They've established 11 new rights of nature laws after hosting the World's People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth in April 2010, which, as you know, was a conference that came right after the real failure of the Copenhagen climate negotiations. It was a response by the people's movements. And at that conference, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth was written, and it's really a key document that we use in our work. And we see it equal to the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Humans. So we can see that there's really the rights of humans and the rights of nature that really need to be understood as universal law. In 2012, in New Zealand, a river was legally declared a person with standing to bring legal actions to protect its interests. And Shannon will be speaking to you more about this. I think it's really some of the most important work we're seeing going forward in the rights of nature movement. And additionally, rights of nature laws, I think it's to understand that not only do they influence what can happen to our natural ecosystems, but also our economy. If they were in place, this would mean that human activities and development must not interfere with the ability of ecosystems to absorb their effects, to regenerate their natural capacities, to thrive and evolve. As an example, current extractive practices like mountaintop removal to obtain coal, which destroys, as we know, entire ecosystems, would be categorically illegal. So would industrial agricultural practices that poison our soil and water, genetically alter natural species, and cause a loss of biodiversity. They would be violations against the rights of nature, against Mother Earth, and would be illegal. This also goes for industrial activities that pollute the ecosystems of the atmosphere. So all of these would be violations. Consequently, employing a rights of nature framework will really encourage a lot of this economic transition to renewable energy that we're wanting, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, the investment in energy efficiency, and organic and diverse agriculture. All of which gives us the healthier ecosystems that we're looking for. Rights of nature laws also require those responsible, including corporate actors, to be held accountable for negative environmental impacts, thereby really encouraging practices that respect the natural limits and laws inherent to the natural world. So I think that it's also important to understand that it's not only a change in law and economic structures, but also how do we transform our values and our culture, because this is really a value change, again, about seeing ourselves living as part and particle of nature versus dominion over nature. And I think that's a really exciting part of this work. And I think that these laws can in part help us to restore the ancient and life-sustaining concepts that have been damaged in our current times, while at the same time opposing the destructive impulse of the free market, which has been codified and empowered by legal structures that treat nature as human property. And for those of you who have been involved in the climate change negotiations concerning the different aspects of approaching climate change, you know that a central discussion in quote-unquote solving the crisis of climate is through market mechanisms, through buying and selling of the right to pollute the atmosphere through schemes like carbon trading. So it's not a surprise that in these schemes, nature is assumed to be a commodity, in that the commodification and financialization of nature is inherent in the capitalist system. I think we really have to ask ourselves, do we have the right to sell and destroy something that belongs to everyone and should really be a part of the shared commons? And really, does it make any sense to try to protect nature and heal our damaged ecosystems by subjecting nature further to an economic system that actually damaged our Earth in the first place? So it doesn't make any sense that we continue these legal frameworks and economic structures that cause the damage. So the last point I wanted to make is a concept that I think is really important to the understanding of rights of nature that comes from indigenous peoples of the Andes and from our allies in social movements in the Global South. I think to really deeply understand rights of nature and to find a way forward in this new understanding of law, this new paradigm, it's also helpful to look at the concept, what's called sumac causai, which has also been translated in Spanish as buen vivir or living well. And it is a difficult term to translate, but I'll just offer here for now that it means living in ecological and economic balance, harmony in relationships, personal and collective growth appropriate to local conditions, good health, and living well in community, including the community of nature. So it's a really broad, deep concept. It offers a worldview and a cosmovision that goes in all directions, up, down, and around, and within ourselves. In the Global South, sumac causai has been a way of life, of course, for indigenous people for millennium. And the concept more recently emerged and became visible in social movements as a reaction to traditional strategies for development and their negative environmental, social, and economic effects, particularly for indigenous peoples. Sumac causai and rights of nature actually were simultaneously incorporated into Ecuador's constitution in 2008 to usher in this influence of indigenous groups. Sumac causai offered an important direction forward to overcome the obsession with Western views of development and created the context to explore alternatives. I think that's really important to, like, how do we get out of this framework of what we see as growth and development? And I think sumac causai offers some really key insights. It calls for a reduction on economic and product development, and instead an increase on human development, such as engagement and encouragement of ethical values, spirituality, creativity, and a deepening of our own connection with Mother Earth as the thing to be valued. Of course, history and logic dictate that transitioning away from a globalized economy based on nature's property and towards ideas like sumac causai and rights of nature will not be smooth or easy. We don't think that, of course not. Yet, the thing is, our survival depends on our ability to do so and to do so quickly. So given the power structures of today, it would be prudent to look at these changes and understand that they're very viable. So a real component of the battle for ideas like rights of nature, sumac causai, and for change in our environmental and economic justice systems is in fact in the streets, through protests, in the schools, through education, in the fields where the farmers are, in the forests, and in the marketplace. These are places where we can bring forward these different ideas. Lastly, I want to also say one of the ways that we've been sharing this work is through different tribunals. We've been having international tribunals at all of the recent climate negotiations, one in Lima, Peru, one in Paris during the climate negotiations, where we had two-day tribunals where we tried a lot of cases like climate crimes against nature, the financialization of nature, agro-food industry, and GMOs, fracking, mega dams, keeping fossil fuels in the ground. We had these amazing events where we had people from all over the world representing these cases, and actually had a tribunal that you would imagine like a people's tribunal, and were able to really demonstrate what would it look like if rights of nature were in place, and found the things I just mentioned in violation of Mother Earth's rights. It was very powerful to see on the international stage what would it look like if we together were holding these laws to be true, and offer it as an alternative to the kinds of things we're seeing coming out of the UN climate negotiations that are based on market mechanisms. So this is really charting new work, and we really encourage you to participate with us. I think since it's been mentioned a few times, I just wanted to note that we're seeing also in this work a real need to address the issues of land defenders, as has been mentioned earlier, the honoring of Beta Caceres, other land defenders. We're seeing a big increase in the very unfortunate deaths of people on the front lines, especially indigenous peoples fighting for their territories, for all of us. So it's also been a case that we've been very interested in these tribunals, is to really stand up for the defenders of the land, because truly, how can we protect the land if we do not defend the defenders of the land? And they're defending these lands for all of us. They are the frontline communities, and that's been a big case also that we've looked at in Rights of Nature. So I want to hand the floor to my incredible colleague, Shannon Biggs, who's been doing this work for a long time, and encourage you to look at the website at the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, at Movement Rights, at their website, to look at our website at WECAN for this developing work on this international global movement for the rights of nature, because I think it's a really big solution that we need to get underneath a lot of these things and change how we're looking at our legal frameworks towards nature, and understand we need a structural change, a systemic change, and I think these new legal components are really key. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Shannon Biggs, and I'm the co-founder and director of Movement Rights, along with my colleague Penny Opal-Plant, who many of you know. And Movement Rights is only 2 years old. Actually, we're a year and a half old. Came out of Penny's work with, as an Indigenous leader, came out of the work that I did at Global Exchange as the Community Rights Director. And when I first started talking about rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth, I was one of only a handful of people in this country who had even heard of it. How many people have heard of rights of nature, rights of Mother Earth now? Yeah, okay, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about the work we do. We do at Movement Rights, we focus on the intersection really of three areas of rights. Community rights, the right of communities to make governing decisions in the places where they live about things that matter to them. The rights of Mother Earth, which we've been talking about, which is how do we give legal standing, how do we give voice to a river, to the Delta? What if the Delta could tell us whether or not tunnels were a good idea? And what if we had the legal force to actually do what the river wanted, what the river needed? What if we could really hear the voice of the river or of the Delta? How differently would the way we do things change if, say, the Gulf of Mexico had a say in deep sea oil drilling? What if on behalf of that ecosystem, we could, the ocean itself, could have sued BP for full restoration of the Gulf? Right? Would we even still have deep sea oil drilling if it were actually up to the ecosystem and there was the power and the legal might to say, that's not good? What about GMOs? Or fracking? Or blowing the tops off of mountains? Those are all legal under our current system of law. So those are two areas of work that we work on, and the third is Indigenous rights. And I think what's really important also to note is that, of course, as Osprey was saying, Indigenous communities are part of that. They're the original peoples who understand what it takes, who've grown up in a place, who are tied to a specific place, who understand, have a different sense of relationship. What's your relationship with, say, the Delta? When a certain bird begins to fly over, do you know what seeds we should plant? Or how much water is diverted? Like, how much personal ownership do we have with the land and the places where we live? It's really hard to see sometimes, especially for those of us who live in cities. You know, I buy my food at the grocery store, I don't grow it. And we live in these cities of giant structures of cement and freeways and all of this, and it feels like we talk about nature as if we're going to go visit it. You know, there are some cultures who don't actually have a word for nature in their language, because they say nature, as you speak about it, seems to refer to something outside yourself, this thing out there. Like you're going to go camping, and so therefore have a relationship with nature while you're camping. But of course we know that that's not really the end-all be-all of our relationship with all of the creative forces on Earth. So I'm working on two specific projects I want to talk to you about. I'm just going to call them out, and then I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do a little exercise. So the first one is, we're working, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Oklahoma, or know that Oklahoma is now the earthquake capital of the world because of fracking, human-induced fracking. We did that. They have thousands of earthquakes a year now. We did that. Not the people in this room, but we did that. The way we have our current structure of law, the governor of Oklahoma says there's nothing that local communities can do to regulate oil and gas. They have tied their hands. Which comes to that first thing that I talked about, community rights. Shouldn't the people who live in those places be able to say no to fracking because it's harmful to the people of their community and actually affects their right to make decisions about what happens to them in the places where they live? Don't we have that right? Yeah, sure, we can applaud that. We absolutely can. What about the land itself in Oklahoma and all of the animals that are affected? Is there a right of the land to not be fracked? Yeah, applaud that too. And what about the indigenous people who've been caring for that land since they were moved there forcibly by U.S. government, the Ponca people of Oklahoma, and all of the other tribes, the sovereign Ponca people, and our good friend and ally, and who sits on our board, Casey Camp Hornick, who is a Ponca elder, and she is also on the tribal council of the Ponca Nation. And she stood up at a Senate hearing where, and told legislators who said that communities could do nothing to stop fracking. And she said, well, if you're tying the hands of the people of Oklahoma, the sovereign people of the Ponca Nation, we're going to ban fracking. All right. How are they going to do that? Well, we hope we're going to be helping them. We hope that we're going to be assisting them in the very first tribal constitution to recognize rights of Mother Earth on Ponca territory and ban fracking. Yes. As she said, there are hundreds of communities now across the United States that have actually changed the law. Sometimes we call it civil disobedience by local lawmaking, but that's another story. When we're talking about rights and we're talking about past movements for rights, and why rights? Why do we have to recognize rights for ecosystems? Well, if we have human rights, where do they come from? What?
We said so. We said so.
We said so. Your very first breath, where does it come from?
Spirit.
So when we talk about, I mean, there are a million answers to that question. Every one of you had something that ran through your head, I hope. And, but the fact is that we, by virtue of being born, there are certain rights that are inalienable. The right to a clean breath of fresh air and to water, that those rights actually put us in this community of Mother Earth. We are all connected. I'm not telling anybody in this room anything they don't already know or believe. But with that, I want to ask you really quickly if you'd all close your eyes and take a journey with me. If you don't want to close your eyes, that's okay. I can't see from here anyway. As you're in your canoe, and you're going down this broad green river, and as you look back behind you, you can see the mountain that gave birth to this river. It's very ancient. Water is broad and deep and wide, and on both sides of you are these beautiful green, lush banks. They're kind of high. These lovely hills and valleys and beautiful lush green ferns and beautiful foliage as you're riding by in your canoe. And you know, it starts to get warm as winter breaks into spring. You take your jacket off and you notice the changes all around you, and you keep going and you notice, yes, that flock of birds going by, oh, that means the farmers are planting this today. And when this butterfly lands, this happens, and the water evaporates from this part of the river over here. That's the time we do our ceremony. That's the time when everybody comes together on the river and pulls over at this very particular sacred place where every year all of the people of the community give thanks to the river for being the life force. And it's not just a river, it's something more. As you step out of your canoe and you pull it over onto the banks and you let your feet stand in the shallow waters and the water is rushing by your feet, and you lean over and you take a drink of the clean water. It's pure and clean. You don't have to worry about whether or not you can drink it. You don't have to worry about whether or not the fish that you eat, whether it's safe to eat, or how many, you don't have to count how many fish maybe that you've eaten that day. There's no mercury poisoning. And you turn and you look at the mountain And the wind is blowing through your hair, and you feel 7 generations before you from the mountain. And as you look ahead and you turn to where the water is going, and you see 7 generations ahead of you, and here's where you stand on the crossroads of this living river. And as part of the culture of your people, you say, ko awa te awa, ko te awa ko au. And in New Zealand, for the Maori people, that means I am the river and the river is me. There is no separation between the river and the life that you have. It's part of their cosmology. Every single person in that community is understanding and recognizing that this is who we are. This river is our ancestor. This is our grandmother. We know how to take care of this river. In New Zealand, this idea has become law. New Zealand has recognized the spiritual and holistic rights of the Wanganui River as one entity, and it has no owner. It used to be owned by the Crown government before that, and for 150 years, the Maori people, the Wanganui iwi, have said, this is, for 150 years, they said, you've stolen this from us. This belongs to us. This is our ancestor. The solution lied in recognizing that the river itself has no owner. And with an apology from the Crown government to the river and to the people of the Wanganui, they entered into an agreement to recognize these spiritual rights of the river and to say, we're going to put forward a new governance structure. We're going to recognize that decisions about what kind of activities can be made on this river, we're actually going to ask the river itself. And that means that there's a process and a board. They've taken away all the regulatory, they're taking away all the regulatory structures that separate the banks from the river to the fisheries, to the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. There's no separation between clean air and clean water. And what they've said is, we're going to put those things all together under one umbrella. Decisions we make about this river and the health of this river will be reflected in the health of the people who live here, and will be based on how do we get to the place where everybody understands their relationship with that river and their place on it. Imagine if we could stand at the banks of the Delta and say the same thing and be in that same place. All over the world, the law is shifting. Law is a powerful tool for a certain viewpoint. How do we actually, a certain set of values. Right now, the values that are being put forward in things like mountaintop removal or fracking, those aren't our values. But what if they were? This idea about rights of Mother Earth or rights of nature, it's not just a nice idea. It's actually about how do we shift law to put human law in the context of natural law. Because we don't really have a lot of choice. But wouldn't it be nice if we actually decided to become, as human beings, become one of the Earth community instead of owners of the Earth community? And that's what it means. So as I leave, I just want to ask you all to say with me, ko awa te awa, ko te awa ko o. I am the river, and the river is me. A little more gusto. I am the river, and the river is me. Thank you.
For the rights of Mother Earth. Woo! Rights of nature. Woo!